Good evening. Tonight we begin with a sequence of developments that, taken together, describe a rapidly intensifying confrontation involving the United States, Iran, and Israel. The developments unfolded across several connected fronts: military action, political statements, and regional consequences. And at the center of the moment is a statement from the President of the United States. U.S. President Donald Trump said the United States would strike Iran very hard over the next week. That statement arrived as fighting involving Iran has continued to intensify. The situation is not unfolding in isolation. It is occurring alongside direct military actions already underway. Before we move forward, take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to support independent, fact-driven reporting. According to the reported information, U.S. and Israeli forces have conducted airstrikes targeting Iranian ballistic missile systems. Those strikes form one side of the current escalation. The other side is the continuing response from Iran. Iran has continued launching drones and missiles. These launches have been directed as retaliation during the same period in which airstrikes have been carried out against Iranian missile infrastructure. So, what emerges here is a cycle of action and response. Airstrikes directed at ballistic missile systems, drones and missiles launched in reply. And over that active military exchange now sits a new declaration from the President of the United States. The language used was direct. Trump said the United States would strike Iran very hard over the next week. That phrase, very hard over the next week, marks a clear escalation in tone compared with the already active military operations. The timeline in the statement is also notable. Over the next week, that phrasing suggests a defined near-term period in which further action could occur. And that declaration arrives while casualties across the region are already mounting. Reports describe widespread casualties across Iran, Lebanon, and Gulf regions. More than 2,000 deaths have been reported. Those casualties span multiple locations connected to the broader conflict environment: Iran, Lebanon, and regions surrounding the Gulf. The conflict environment now stretches across a geographic area that includes several key strategic locations. And the rising death toll reflects the expanding scope of the fighting. More than 2,000 people have been reported killed. That figure places the current moment among the most severe escalations in the region connected to these hostilities. While the military exchanges continue, political leadership in Iran has also issued statements about the next phase of the confrontation. Iranian leader Mojtaba Khamenei has vowed to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically important maritime passages in the world. It connects the Persian Gulf to global shipping routes, and it plays a central role in the movement of oil supplies. Khamenei's statement was not limited to the closure vow alone. He also issued a warning directed toward neighboring countries. Specifically, he warned those countries against hosting U.S. forces. That warning signals concern about the potential expansion of military staging locations across the region. It also introduces a regional diplomatic dimension to the confrontation. Neighboring governments now find themselves referenced directly in Iranian leadership statements. At the same time, the airstrikes and drone launches continue to define the immediate battlefield conditions. U.S. and Israeli forces targeting ballistic missile systems. Iran launching drones and missiles in response. These exchanges are unfolding while the possibility of additional U.S. strikes is now being discussed openly by the president himself. Trump's statement about striking Iran very hard over the next week sits directly on top of those existing actions. And that statement did not emerge in a vacuum. It came shortly after another policy move that has already begun affecting global markets. The United States eased sanctions on Russian oil. That shift in sanctions policy has already been linked to movements in the global oil market. And the intensifying confrontation with Iran is adding additional pressure to those same markets. The conflict is affecting global oil markets. Energy prices and supply expectations are closely tied to developments in the Gulf region. And with the Strait of Hormuz now mentioned directly in Iranian leadership statements, the market implications become even more closely watched. Because that waterway serves as one of the main arteries through which global oil shipments move. A vow to close it carries immediate implications. even before any closure occurs. Markets react not only to actions, but also to signals, statements, warnings, military moves. All of these elements combine to shape the global energy outlook. And right now, each of those elements is present at the same time. Active airstrikes, ongoing drone and missile launches, regional casualties surpassing 2,000 reported deaths, a warning from Iran about hosting U.S. forces, a vow to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, and a declaration from the U.S. president that the United States would strike Iran very hard over the next week. Taken together, these developments outline a moment of rapid escalation, not theoretical, not abstract, but unfolding in real time across multiple countries and multiple arenas: military, political, economic, each arena now connected to the others. The airstrikes target missile systems. The missiles and drones launch in response. Leadership statements signal future intentions. And markets respond to the uncertainty created by all of it. One statement in particular now frames the immediate horizon. The President of the United States saying the country would strike Iran very hard over the next week. That is a defined statement, a defined time window, and it arrives while the exchange of strikes and launches continues. Sometimes in moments like this, the facts themselves carry a certain gravity. No embellishment needed. Just the sequence of events. One action, then another, then another. And suddenly the world is watching a situation that feels like it has accelerated all at once. Or, as one quiet line might capture the moment, we are watching events move faster than anyone expected. Right now, the region is in the middle of that acceleration. Military exchanges continue. Political warnings expand. And global markets react to signals coming from both Washington and Tehran, all while the next week, the time frame mentioned by the president approaches. And that is where we begin tonight, because understanding how these developments connect is essential to understanding what comes next. And the next layer of this unfolding confrontation reveals just how many moving parts are already in motion. As the confrontation continues to unfold, the sequence of actions between the United States, Israel, and Iran has become clearer. Airstrikes have been carried out. Missiles and drones have been launched in response. And across the region, the effects of these actions have spread beyond the immediate targets. U.S. and Israeli forces have conducted airstrikes aimed at Iranian ballistic missile systems. These systems form part of Iran's missile capabilities, and the strikes have specifically focused on that infrastructure. The targeting of missile systems represents a direct military action intended to affect Iran's ability to launch those weapons. At the same time, Iran has continued launching drones and missiles. Those launches have occurred as part of the response to the airstrikes being carried out against Iranian missile capabilities. So the situation now reflects two parallel actions: airstrikes targeting missile systems, and drone and missile launches occurring in reply. These actions have not remained confined to a single location. Reports describe the effects of the conflict spreading across several parts of the region: Iran, Lebanon, and Gulf regions. Across those areas, the number of casualties has continued to grow. More than 2,000 deaths have been reported. That number reflects the scale of the violence connected to the ongoing fighting. Each of those locations carries its own strategic importance. Iran is directly involved in the military exchange. Lebanon sits within the broader regional landscape connected to the conflict. And Gulf regions include areas that are closely tied to energy production and maritime routes. The casualties reported across these places illustrate how the impact of the confrontation is reaching beyond the immediate military targets. As the fighting continues, leadership in Iran has also issued statements about how the country intends to respond to the broader situation. Iranian leader Mojtaba Khamenei has vowed to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. That statement carries particular weight because of the location itself. The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf with the open ocean. It is one of the primary passages through which oil shipments move from Gulf producers to the rest of the world. Because of that role, the strait has long been viewed as one of the most strategically significant maritime routes anywhere. A vow to keep it close signals an intention tied directly to that importance. Khamenei's remarks did not stop there. He also issued a warning directed toward neighboring countries. Those countries were warned against hosting U.S. forces. The warning places regional governments directly within the political language of the confrontation. Neighboring states are now referenced as potential participants through the possibility of hosting military forces. That element introduces another layer to the already complex situation. Military exchanges are occurring. Leadership statements are signaling potential next steps, and the wider region is being addressed in those statements. At the same time, the military operations themselves remain active. Airstrikes have targeted ballistic missile systems. Iran continues launching drones and missiles. These actions define the immediate operational environment. They also occur while the President of the United States has publicly stated that the United States would strike Iran very hard over the next week. That declaration adds another dimension to the timeline, because it places attention on a specific upcoming period, the next week. That time frame now exists alongside the ongoing military exchanges. The current actions continue, and a statement has been issued indicating that further strikes could occur. All of this is unfolding while the broader regional effects continue to expand. Casualties have been reported across Iran, Lebanon, and Gulf regions. The reported total exceeds 2,000 deaths. Those figures represent the human cost of the confrontation that is taking place across multiple locations. The military actions themselves are focused on specific targets and capabilities. Ballistic missile systems have been struck. Drones and missiles have been launched. But the consequences extend beyond those direct exchanges. Communities across several countries are now counted within the casualty reports. And while these events continue, the regional strategic environment is also shifting. The Strait of Hormuz has been mentioned directly in leadership statements. Neighboring countries have been warned about hosting U.S. forces. Those elements demonstrate how the confrontation is affecting not only military operations, but also diplomatic relationships. Governments across the region are watching closely, because the decisions made in one place may affect conditions in another. And the Strait of Hormuz remains central to that wider dynamic. It is not just a geographic location. It is also a crucial pathway for global energy shipments. Oil travels through that narrow passage in large volumes. Any statement about closing it immediately attracts global attention, even before any physical change occurs. The declaration itself becomes a factor in global calculations. And those calculations are already taking place in the oil markets. The escalating military actions have affected global oil markets. Energy markets respond to developments in the Gulf region with particular sensitivity. When tensions rise near major shipping routes or production areas, traders and governments alike watch closely, because oil prices and supply expectations are closely connected to the stability of those routes. Now several elements affecting those calculations are present simultaneously. Airstrikes targeting missile systems. Drone and missile launches continuing in response. A vow regarding the Strait of Hormuz. Warnings directed at neighboring countries. And the statement from the U.S. president about striking Iran very hard over the next week. Each of these factors interacts with the others. Military activity influences political statements. Political statements influence market reactions. And market reactions reflect expectations about how the situation might develop. At the center of all this are the ongoing exchanges themselves. Airstrikes have been conducted. Missiles and drones have been launched. And the reported casualties have risen across multiple regions. More than 2,000 deaths have now been reported. Those numbers represent lives lost amid the escalation. They also illustrate the scale of the conflict environment that has developed. In moments like this, the sequence of events can feel almost relentless. One development follows another, and the accumulation of those developments begins to define the larger picture. A strike, a response, a statement, a warning, another strike, another response. And the region continues to move through that cycle. Sometimes a single line captures the emotional weight of such a moment. Something simple, something human. Every number in a report is someone's life. That quiet truth sits beneath the larger geopolitical developments. Because while leaders speak and military actions unfold, the reported casualties continue to rise. And across Iran, Lebanon, and the Gulf regions, the effects of the conflict are already being counted. The next development in this unfolding confrontation now connects the military escalation to another critical arena: global energy markets, and the policy decision that preceded the latest statement from Washington. That connection reveals how events in the region are influencing economic forces far beyond the battlefield. As these military exchanges and political statements continue to unfold, another dimension of the situation has been developing at the same time. It involves energy markets, and it begins with a policy decision that came before the latest declaration from Washington. The United States eased sanctions on Russian oil. That decision became part of the broader sequence of developments surrounding the current escalation involving Iran. Sanctions on Russian oil had previously limited certain forms of economic activity connected to Russian energy exports. Easing those sanctions represents a shift in that policy framework. The change arrived during a period when global energy markets were already sensitive to developments in the Middle East. Energy markets respond quickly to signals that could affect supply routes, production areas, or shipping lanes. And the Gulf region plays a central role in those calculations. That region is home to major oil producers. It also contains some of the most important maritime routes for transporting oil to global markets. One of those routes has now become central to the current confrontation: the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian leader Mojtaba Khamenei has vowed to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. The statement places the waterway directly within the political and strategic language of the current conflict. The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to open international waters. Through that passage flows a significant portion of the world's oil shipments. Oil tankers travel through the strait as part of the global energy supply chain. Because of that role, any development connected to the strait can affect market expectations. Even the possibility of disruption becomes a factor in how markets respond. Khamenei's vow to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed adds that possibility directly into the conversation surrounding the conflict. And it arrives at the same moment that military exchanges between Iran and US and Israeli forces are continuing. Airstrikes have targeted Iranian ballistic missile systems. Iran has continued launching drones and missiles in response. Those actions have unfolded across multiple locations connected to the region. The effects have been reported across Iran, Lebanon, and Gulf regions. More than 2,000 deaths have been reported in connection with the conflict. Those reported casualties reflect the scale of the violence associated with the current escalation. At the same time, the statements coming from leadership figures are shaping how governments and markets interpret the situation. Khamenei's warning to neighboring countries not to host U.S. forces introduces another element to the regional landscape. Neighboring governments now appear within the framework of that warning. The statement signals concern about potential military basing arrangements in the region. And it highlights how the confrontation involves not only direct participants, but also surrounding states. Meanwhile, in Washington, the President of the United States issued a declaration that added a new timeline to the unfolding events. U.S. President Donald Trump said the United States would strike Iran very hard over the next week. That phrase places attention on a specific period of time: the next week. The statement arrives while airstrikes and retaliatory launches are already occurring. So the situation now contains two overlapping realities: active military exchanges and a declaration that further strikes could take place during the coming week. Those developments occur in parallel with the energy market implications that have been building. Oil markets have already been affected by the escalating military actions. Energy traders and governments monitor events in the Gulf region closely because supply routes pass directly through that area. The Strait of Hormuz is one of those routes. When a leader vows to keep it closed, markets take notice. Because the strait functions as a gateway between Gulf oil producers and the global economy. Ships carrying oil must pass through that narrow waterway to reach international destinations. Any change involving that passage can influence expectations about supply availability. Those expectations are reflected in global oil markets. The easing of sanctions on Russian oil also feeds into that same system. Changes in sanctions policy can alter the availability of oil supplies in global trade. When those changes occur at the same time as rising tensions in the Gulf region, the interaction between the two developments becomes significant. Markets are watching both the sanctions decision and the escalating confrontation involving Iran. The connection between these developments highlights how the current moment extends beyond military operations alone. It includes political statements, regional diplomacy, energy policy, and global economic reactions. All of those elements are unfolding simultaneously. Airstrikes targeting ballistic missile systems, drone and missile launches continuing in response, warnings issued to neighboring countries, a vow concerning the Strait of Hormuz, the easing of sanctions on Russian oil, and a statement from the U.S. president that the United States would strike Iran very hard over the next week. Each element exists within the same evolving sequence. One event leads into another. Another statement follows, and the broader picture gradually takes shape. In that picture, the conflict affects several layers of international life: military operations in the region, political messaging between governments, energy routes that connect the Gulf to the rest of the world, and markets that respond to signals coming from those developments. The reported casualties continue to remind observers that the consequences are not abstract. More than 2,000 deaths have been reported across Iran, Lebanon, and Gulf regions. Those figures represent the human impact associated with the conflict. Lives lost amid the exchange of strikes and launches. Communities affected across multiple countries. The scale of that toll forms part of the context surrounding every political statement and every market reaction. Sometimes the most powerful reflection in a moment like this is not a long explanation, just a quiet line, something simple enough to sit with the facts themselves. We measure events in headlines, but people live them in real time. And right now, those events are still unfolding. Military exchanges continue. Leadership statements shape expectations about what might happen next. Energy markets respond to developments tied to supply routes and sanctions policy. And the Strait of Hormuz remains central to those calculations. The declaration from Washington places attention on the coming week. The vow from Tehran places attention on the strait. And the region continues to move through the consequences of the actions already underway. Airstrikes have targeted ballistic missile systems. Iran has launched drones and missiles in response. Casualties have been reported across multiple countries. And global oil markets have been affected by the escalation. Those are the facts that define this moment. A moment in which military conflict, political signaling, and energy economics intersect at the same time. The sequence remains ongoing. The developments remain connected. And the world continues to watch how the next steps in this confrontation will unfold.